Greetings. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about the course History of Economic Thought and Analysis and take us through the very introductory material that you should know. First of all, we want to remember that the simplest definition of economics that we learn in our principles classes, the simplest definition is simply that it's the study of the allocation of scarce resources to competing wants. The underlying principle here is that the world is a stingy place, that there is relatively material scarcity, or that is also combined with insatiable human wants. So given the scarcity that exists at any given moment in society, and given the fact that there is no limit to what people want, combined in turn with the concepts of individualistic, hedonistic, and profit-maximizing behavior, if we have all these kind of behavioral characteristics and material limitations, then we say we know the foundation for an economy, and therefore we can analyze it. Hedonistic, by the way, is not quite what it sounds like. It really is about thinking about the satisfaction of material wants, as opposed to any sort of profound looking at ideas or anything like that. So this simple definition of economics is often the foundation for almost all of the work that we do in the regular economics classes. Unfortunately, there are some underlying assumptions about this, behavioral assumptions, that really suggest that we're really only talking about a market economy, or an economy that is very similar to one that simulates a market transaction, such as a centrally planned economy, which, while it has some planning involved in it, nevertheless is based on the same kind of principle of scarcity combined with unlimited wants. But the reality is that this sort of market economy is really not a very good model for all times and all places. I think it's very hard to apply this definition to medieval Europe, to Native American tribes, to early African communal societies, or even certain periods of modern communism. For example, in the Great Leap Forward in the late 1950s in China, there was a big effort to collectivize all of these consumer activities so that you would have a much more streamlined society, and a society where you would not have the kind of individualistic quest for the maximum of things. Rather, it was a society where they were trying to create a more egalitarian structure and a more collective structure where people's concerns were about each other and society, not just about individually getting ahead. And same could be true of many other societies that I've mentioned here. Certainly African communal societies have that characteristic to a great extent. So if we try to apply this definition of the unlimited wants versus scarce resources, and therefore individual activities that lead to a market economy, we really wouldn't understand these societies very well, because they weren't functioning that way. But economics, as we teach it today, often claims to be universal across time and space. It says that all societies are fundamentally the same, even if they are not really appear to be. A good example of this problem is that North and Thomas, in a work called The Rise of the Western World, talked about how in the feudal period in Europe, when the market was really very underdeveloped, not really developed at all, they talked about the market almost as a living being that was trying to break free of the limitations that feudalism put on it. So that's not how the people during feudalism were thinking about what was going on. But that's how we look backwards on it and try to impose those kinds of ideas in those earlier societies, and we don't therefore understand them very well if we come at it from that standpoint. Now, one of the reasons that we get this limited understanding of economics is that we think of it as emerging with capitalism. That is, the rise of capitalism in the 18th and 19th centuries is really the time when we began to have much more systematic economic analysis, what some people have called the scientific analysis of economic life. But that analysis was of the emerging capitalist system. It wasn't an analysis of all economic life. So we can better understand capitalism and its analysis if we understand both the pre- and post-capitalist societies, their economies, and the way the contemporary people of that period viewed them. And so if we look at this more broadly and think about how in some societies there was ideologies that dominated those societies that enabled a slave master to justify, even to many of the slaves, that they were predestined to be in that kind of condition. Well, if we investigate whether or not maybe there's some of that in the current economic thought, even though we claim that it is very scientific and objective. In general, in the past, we think that a lot of the economic ideas reflected the needs, aspirations, and desires and mores of a dominant social class. I wonder if perhaps some of the economic ideas that we have today might be justifications for the kind of inequalities that exist in our own society. So then I'll leave you with this question, whether economic analysis today is apologia, that is just justification for an existing structure, or is it really social science in the sense of an objective appraisal of how society works? The question is, do our tools of economics actually obscure a full understanding of society, even as earlier accepted ideas such as the medieval belief in the great chain of being obscured the exploitative character of those earlier societies? The great chain of being, which we can talk about in class, indicated that there was a hierarchy in the universe with God at the top, the angels and archangels underneath, and then coming to the temporal plane we had the Pope and the various other bishops, archbishops, cardinals, and so on. And then below that we end up with the medieval lords and the various serfs. And this idea was that this chain of being, this hierarchy, was determined and established by God, and therefore if you tried to move away from the link in the chain that you were located in, then you were defying the natural order, and you were in fact defying God. It's a great way to get somebody to stop trying to improve themselves. If you say, if you do that, you're defying God. So do we ask ourselves, when we study neoclassical price theory, Keynesian macroeconomic theory, and perhaps the econometric apparatus that we use, which is based largely on the classical techniques of statistical inference, do they actually enlighten us, or do they also tend to obscure things? And we'll be talking about that in class. Thank you.